For most people, the holiday season is a time of renewed celebration, but for survivors of violence, this can also magnify the feelings of loss. That's one of the reasons for activities through December 20th in the 17th Annual Survivors of Homicide Victims Awareness Month, organized by the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. To tell us what's planned over the weeks ahead is our guest from the Institute, Program Coordinator Alexandra Chery. Thank you very much for being with us, Alexandra.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
I know you've been doing this for a long time, but what is it about homicide victims, survivors that we need to be aware of, and who needs to be aware of it?
So the Survivors of Homicide Victims Awareness Month is an effort to educate everyone in the public and all policymakers about the impact that murder has on survivors and those folks who are left behind after a murder happens. There's a stigma, there's the way society looks at murder victims and the blame and the shame that it places on a murder victim's family. And based on that response by the media or by any other systems, families then do not receive the services that they deserve maybe based on their loved one's actions or just based on the perception of who their loved one was when they were alive.
Well, your mother and all of many people involved with the Institute who have been working on this for years, but what about the kind of services that survivors need, and I guess starting with the trauma?
I mean, even before the trauma is addressed in that immediate aftermath, folks aren't prepared to bury their loved one if they didn't have life insurance. Who's prepared for any tragic death? So in that immediate 24 to 72 hours, a family needs to be responded to and held through figuring out how to bury their loved one with dignity and respect, how to gather all of the financial and practical resources to make sure their loved one is put to rest.
Of course, the other thing is that with trauma, this isn't just something you feel a few days or a few months after something terrible happens. This can go on for years, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. So, I mean, even before a homicide happens, we're all growing up with our own traumatic experiences, and then this homicide happens, and there's a traumatic piece, knowing that your loved one's life was taken in such a tragic way, and then we re-victimize, and then there's that secondary traumatization when we respond to families in a way that's not equitable or in a way that tells them they're not worthy.
Well, one of the things that you also try to promote is healing that comes from contact with other survivors. Your family, you come from a family of survivors.
Yes.
Going back to when you were still in school as a kid, you found out about other students. Talk about what happened connecting with those students.
You remember that? Yes. When Louis was killed, I was in kindergarten. And I said, there are groups for all kinds of death, and the groups that are out there aren't groups for me. So I want to start a group for people whose brothers were killed, because that was my 4-year-old and 5-year-old context. So working with my parents, my teachers, we created a space, and at first it was just me in the space, and then later found out that there were other students who were also impacted. And I think it was because I was wearing a Louis button. One student said, "Oh, my family has a button like that." And then we made a connection, and then that group, that was now it's Up Academy, but historically it was the John Marshall School on 35 Westville. And the teachers and the administration there were amazing, and they really held the students through that.
Of course, another thing, now you're all grown up and you're working with victims maybe in a more systematic way. And one of the things you're helping them with is knowledge of their legal rights and even the parole process. Why is that so important?
I think it's important for survivors to be in control of the process as much as they can. So one way to be in control, and this is in line with the Massachusetts Victim Bill of Rights, is the right to knowledge, the right to information, the right to be present, and the right to speak. So I think as long as we equip folks with all of the information possible, then they can travel that journey. And the specific way that we do that is through our Survivors Leadership Academy, where we work with systems that survivors have to interact with now that they have someone who's been murdered, and they hear directly from those systems, here's our process, here's why we do what we do. And in the same time, it's teaching and learning on both ends, because survivors and participants are able to say, oh, that's awesome that that's your process. And here was my experience. Here's the impact that the system you're coming from had on me. So it's also an opportunity for folks in those systems to go back to where they were and to say, all right, the things, business as usual isn't always working, and not everybody's receiving what we say we're offering.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Alexandra Chery from the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. Alexandra, talk about some of the events that are going to be coming up, because one of the things, it sounds very much like a holiday event is going to be happening in Dorchester. You're going to have people making holiday wreaths. Talk about these wreaths. These are not what you usually see on a door.
So one of the events that the Peace Institute, in partnership with Community Violence Response Team at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, we're partnering together to host a holiday wreath making, and that's going to be at the Peace Institute. And what's special about these wreaths is we're inviting all families, and especially survivors, to come through and bring a memento or a photo of your loved one, and if you feel called, to add it to the wreath. So it's an opportunity for families to have just candid, casual conversation over who their loved one was or what their holiday traditions are, and it's really a relaxed environment. It's happening on December 6th, and we're having two sessions. So 4:30 to 6, and then we're going to break, and then 6:30 to 8. So we encourage folks to RSVP. That way we can have as much food and wreaths for you as possible. It's a completely free event, and all families and survivors are welcome.
You also have some events coming up at the Grove Hall Library and the Strand Theater.
So there are a host of events that are happening throughout the month that other survivors are putting on. And what we do at the Grove Hall Library is we host a Serving Survivors of Homicide Victims Providers Network. We just met for the last time this morning, actually, for the year, so we'll be reconvening in 2018. The event that you're talking about, though, at the Strand Theater, that is Mary Franklin and the Women Survivors of Homicide movement. They're hosting a Circle We Share video premiere, and that group is really shedding light on unsolved homicides in the city of Boston. So we will be there, and we're actually sponsoring that event.
We should also mention part of the celebration here is that you honored the work of a couple of organizations.
Yes.
Talk about those organizations.
Yes. So we honored two organizations. We honored Clarissa Turner and Legacy Lives On. That's the organization that she founded. And then we honored the founders of My Brother's Keeper 617. So there are two My Brother's Keepers. There's one on the city level, and then the group that we honored, they added the 617 to the end of their name, so folks didn't get confused between the two groups. This is a community-based, both of them, community-based nonprofit organizations. Legacy Lives On. They surround families after a homicide, and their main goal is to make sure that no individual victim of a homicide they make sure that they're always remembered and no one's forgotten. And they surround families around the holidays. They host monthly meetings, and it's really honestly, if you look at the network of survivors in Boston, a lot of them, if not all of them, have been through or are a part of that legacy group. Clarissa Turner she's a quiet, very quiet, humble leader, and we wanted to make sure that she was recognized for that. And even in recognizing her, she wanted her legacy ladies to stand up when she was receiving her award. So that entire group is a group that we look at and that we honor and celebrate. And then My Brother's Keeper 617, they are a group of men who are mentoring younger boys, younger generations. And the work that they do is so important because they're men who have dealt with the pressures that society puts on men of color, and that pressure to kind of fall into the stigma and fall into what society says men of color are. And, they are very transparent about contributing to some of the harm that's happened in the communities historically. And they use that knowledge and that experience to impact the lives of the young men and the young boys who are coming up after them. And in a very concrete way, they expose the children to areas and ideas outside of their own neighborhoods, just so they can get, like they're symbolically getting a safe space. So symbolically, and then also mentally, they've created this safe haven within that group, so that those young men can feel free to speak whatever their truth is.
I think you must have seen over the years a lot of examples of people who maybe they came on your radio screen, or at least the screen of the Institute, when they were hurting and needed help, and eventually they become leaders. They go through changes. What's that like? That
is the Survivors of Homicide Victims Network. So those folks come through the Peace Institute, and they've transformed. They've transformed their pain, their anger into power and action. And right now they're informing, influencing, and impacting lives in tremendous ways. And they're also impacting the way society looks at murder victims and how it responds to their families.
Finally, you have one more event coming up, the 20th of December, the Gala. Talk about what you got planned for that.
Yes, so on December 20th, that is the official closing date of the Awareness Month, and that's that's when we send people off into the holidays after having a long month of spending a lot of time together at different events. And the Gala, it's really a time to celebrate everything that people have been doing all month long. So I encourage you to send photos to us to my email, alexandra@ldbpeaceinstitute.org. We're encouraging folks to send photos so that we can really display what you've been doing all month. And we're just going to celebrate. We're going to dance. We're going to have a live performance. We're going to have a DJ. We're going to eat. And we're just really going to celebrate our survivorship and all the work that survivors and providers have been doing.
Well, if people want to come and enjoy that or help sponsor it, what's the best way for them to follow up?
If they could please respond to that email address I just gave, or give me a call at 617-825-1917. We'd like folks to RSVP by December 4th so that we can have have some space for you.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Alexandra Chery from the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute.